So why should we believe that life is intelligently designed rather than just randomly coming to be on its own? Last week I mentioned the difference between origin science, how things came to be, or the origination of matter and life and so forth, versus evolutionary science, how things adapt and change over time based on environmental pressures. The problem with the godless evolutionary science, which is taught worldwide in most schools, is that you cannot start evolving until you first have an origin. You have to exist before you can evolve. And all origin science confirms creation by intelligent design and refutes evolutionary origins. And that's why they don't like to talk about origin science. Because if you look at the big premises upon which evolutionary godless science rests and the premises upon which creation rests, you will discover that they all support creation and refute godless origins. Now, when you think about scientific evidence, what is a scientific evidence? Scientific evidence is something that is testable and reproducible, and you can test it and it just gets the same results over and over again, and it's provable. That's what science is, basically, very simplistically put. We cannot, in either theory, godless evolutionary origins or special creation, go back and actually test the moment in which the universe was created. That is beyond our ability to test in a lab. So we have to look at the premises upon which those rest and see if those are testable and which they support. And so here are the premises. Evolution, there was nothing of any kind, nothing. And from nothing came something. Creation, there was already something, and from something came something. From evolution, order came from disorder or chaos on its own with no intelligent input. This idea actually violates the second law of thermodynamics. And all scientific experiments that we do today on Earth disprove this theory. Creation, order, comes from disorder with intelligent input. This idea is in harmony with the second law of thermodynamics, and it is proven in everybody's life experience every day. Third premise, evolution premise, life came from non-living matter on its own, spontaneously. Was some point in the past called spontaneous generation, and this was disproven scientifically. And so they renamed it to abiogenesis. Doesn't that sound much more scientific? It's abiogenesis. Okay? Which also has no evidence in science, and science proves it's not true. Creation, though, has the principle that living matter came from living matter, which this entire planet every day demonstrates to be true. Further problems with the godless view of origins, as described in Nancy Pearcey's book, and I brought the book to show you, Finding Truth. I recommend this book. Great read, easy read, a lot of really good philosophical and evidence-based arguments for the existence of God. And I want to thank Marilyn Home, who gifted me this book, one of our online listeners. And she writes, the origin of the universe has given rise to the puzzle known as the fine-tuning problem. The fundamental physical constants of the universe are exquisitely balanced as though on a knife's edge to sustain life. Things like the force of gravity, the strong nuclear force, the weak nuclear force, the electromagnetic force, the ratio of the mass of a proton and electron, and many other factors have just the right value needed to make life possible. If any of these critical numbers were changed even slightly, the universe could not sustain any form of life. For example, if the strength of gravity were smaller or larger than its current value by only 1 part in 10 to the 60th, that's a 1 with 60 zeros behind it. If it changed, gravity changed by that little, 1 part in 10 to the 60th, which we can't even get our minds around, the universe would be uninhabitable. This is why God said in Matthew, Christ said in Matthew, you think I've come to change the law? No, I haven't come to change the law. I've come to live in harmony and fulfill it. Not one jot or tittle, nothing in the law could change. And everything wouldn't exist. She goes on to write, what makes the fine-tuning problem so puzzling is that there is no physical cause to explain it. Nothing in all physics explains why its fundamental principles should conform themselves so precisely to life's requirements, says astronomer George Greenstein. Why do you think chemists have never been able to create life in a lab? Pearcey quotes physicist Paul Davies, who says, the central role of information explains why scientists have failed to cook up life in the chemistry lab. Chemistry is about substances and how they react, whereas biology appeals to the concepts such as information, which is clearly not chemical. Genetic information can be described only by using terminology borrowed from the mental world of language and communication. DNA is a genetic database containing instructions on how to build an organism. The genetic code has to be transcribed and translated before it can act. This is not simple chemical. You have to have information encoded in the sequence of how those various molecules are organized. It would be no different than our alphabet. Okay, look at our alphabet and taking like children's blocks that have alphabets on them, the alphabet letters of the alphabet on them, and you take those blocks and you just jumble them up in a bag, and you expect that they're going to come out writing the encyclopedia in proper order, because the encyclopedia has significantly less information in it than your chromosomes do. Do you see how foolish that idea is? Chemistry, molecules, and so we'll keep going on. Biologists' favorite analogy for DNA is a computer. The molecule itself, the physical change of chemicals, is like the hardware, the machine. The DNA, the encoded information, how they're organized, is the software. In the origin of life research, the focus, in other words, these evolutionary biologists don't believe in God and looking in the lab to do lab experiments to try to prove that DNA could have come all on its own with sparks and this and that if you got the right chemical swoop together. It's focusing exclusively on the hardware, simply having the chemicals interact to produce the molecules that make up DNA. Attempts at chemical synthesis focus exclusively on the hardware, the chemical substrate of life. Davies writes, they ignore the software, the information aspect, yet any 12-year-old kid with a laptop knows that building an electronic device out of copper, plastic, and silicone has nothing to do with writing the code to create the software program. The surprising implication is that even if scientists succeeded in coaxing all the right chemicals to link up and form DNA molecules in a test tube, that would do nothing to explain where the encoded genetic information came from. Y'all with me on this? Okay? It would be like if scientists got together and somehow created an atmosphere with wind and sand so that they blew together enough that pieces of wood shaped themselves into the letters of the alphabet. Okay, this is an analogy for what they're saying. Chemicals got together and formed DNA molecules, letters of the alphabet. It would still, even if they had, okay, if we get enough wind speed and shear forces and the right friction from sand and other molecules and hitting at the right angles, look, these molecules, there's an A, there's a B, there's a D, we got all these molecules, all these letters together. That still doesn't explain how all those letters came to be in the encyclopedia in the right order to make sense. And so even if they get DNA molecules to form in a chemical experiment, that has no bearing on how they got put together in an order that has all the information that creates you. You follow that? And there's no natural explanation for that. None. Zero. Further, even if the level of denial within science, you talk about faith without evidence, blind faith, exactly. It is unbelievable the level of denial among the godless.
It's a religion.
There's no question, because even if they should coax the chemicals to come together and form DNA, you understand that in their experiment was done with intelligent input. They created this atmosphere, the conditions, the chemicals, the electrical. They brought it all together so that it could do that. It didn't happen spontaneously on its own like they claim it did historically. So even their basic building block ideas are contradictory to the way they say it happened. Further, there are other lines of reason to support intelligent design to be much more reasonable than a godless origin. First, the principle of cause and effect. In order for an effect to occur, the cause has to be capable of producing the effect. Think that through. Does that make sense to everybody? Whatever the original cause is, in order for an effect to happen, that cause has to be capable of producing it. Okay? For instance, in order for a child to be born, cause and effect, okay? Those who are bringing forth the child have to have the ability to cause that outcome. They can't be sterile. Or you can't put two rocks together in a box, shake them up, and have a child born. Because two rocks aren't capable. They can't bring that effect about. Everybody with me now?
Like a pebble.
Okay. So, with that in mind, Pearcey puts it like this. Because humans are capable of knowing, we are capable of knowing, understanding, the first cause that produced them must have a mind. Because humans are capable of choosing, the first cause must have a will. And so on. Philosopher Etienne Gilson captures the argument neatly. Because a human is someone and not a something, the source of human life must also be a someone. Materialism cannot explain consciousness. There is nothing in science that has ever come up with a theory, not even a theory for the existence of human consciousness. Philosopher Evan Fales, and these people are evolutionary scientists who recognize that they have no explanation for it, but they continue to believe in their evolutionism, calls it a mystery. Darwinian evolution implies that humans emerged through the blind operations of natural forces. It is mysterious how such forces could generate something non-physical, like the human consciousness. It's not physical. Philosopher Colin McGinn treats it akin to a miracle. Again, an evolutionary thinking person, but he says this. We do not know how consciousness might have arisen by natural processes from antecedently existing materials. In other words, materials that already are in existence that have no consciousness. How could that lead to consciousness? We have no idea. So notice what he said. We are tempted. It's like it's a temptation. But don't sin and go this way. We are tempted, however, reluctantly to turn to divine assistance. The people who are honest at heart with the evidence realize that they can never come up with a godless explanation for the complexity of life on earth, our consciousness. So we come to the deep denial. The deep denial found in the evolutionary biologists that deny God. It's so deep, and they're so blind to it, they get angry and agitated and start protesting people who want to put forth design science. And this is, in the words of philosopher Galen Strawson, the denial of consciousness is surely the strangest thing that has ever happened in the whole history of human thought. Think that through. The fact that you're thinking means you've got consciousness, yet you're denying it's, okay? It shows that the power of human credulity, meaning the ability to believe without evidence.
Blind credulity.
Blind, remember we talked, the ability to believe, the power of human credulity is unlimited. That capacity of human minds to be gripped by theory, by faith, is truly unbounded. It reveals the deepest irrationality of the human mind. And what he's saying is doing that? Believing in a godless origin is doing that. Okay? When we speak of evolution, so this is origin science. Origin science, if you're really a scientist, you have to come back and say origin science. All the things we can test, all the things we can produce, all the evidence that we have clearly speaks to an intelligent designer who was involved in creation on planet Earth. When we speak of evolution, which is the adaptation, really, how things evolve or change over time, the Bible actually teaches, right in the very beginning, this was part of how God designed things. Adam and Eve were told they were going to have children in their image. As they learned, changed, transformed, matured, they would change themselves and they would then pass changes on to their kids. We see this in Genesis. We see it in the commandment. What does the one commandment say about 3 and 4 generations? things passed down 3 and 4 generations. That's what it says. We see it in the Psalms, born in sin, conceived in iniquity. We are created, designed, constructed with the ability to learn, adapt, change, and pass those changes on to the next generation. This is epigenetic modification. It is not mutation of the DNA sequence. It is a set of instructions that sit above your genome, telling the genes which ones to turn on and which ones to turn off, and we pass those series of instructions along to our kids, modifying and changing. Darwin made lots of observations. He was a good observer of nature. He just having unmoored himself, and talk about the integrative evidence-based approach, he was using science and nature decoupled from its moorings in Scripture. And he got this theory that is just completely inconsistent with reality. Many theologians do the same thing when you use Scripture decoupled from its moorings in science and nature. And they get theories about God and everything else that are just as irrational as what Darwin teaches. But Darwin, but he was a good observer. He observed things. And one of the things he observed, the famous finches. He observed these finches, and these finches had all different beaks. Some of these finches had beaks that were very much designed for getting worms and grubs out of the dirt. Others were designed for crushing seeds. Others were designed for getting pollen or so forth. In other words, all these different shaped beaks. And he hypothesized that this was random mutations happening over millions of years with biological pressures where they would adapt to different environments. Those who had the beak shapes would reproduce, and those who didn't have those beak shapes wouldn't reproduce. And over the course of time, these changes happened because of environmental pressures and the necessity for this. What's interesting is today with genetic science, they've actually examined those very finches and looked at the DNA sequences, and their DNA sequences are the same. And all those ones that he observed, not all finches of the world, but in that group of finches that had these different beaks, their DNA sequences are the same. What was different is the epigenetic instructions sitting above the DNA. And in this research, they showed that they could make those beak changes happen in 1 to 2 generations. Epigenetic modification. And I've got the reference for that science in the notes for those who want to read that science. So had Darwin, he observed, I got a hypothesis. Nothing wrong with that. Nothing wrong with come up with a hypothesis. Yeah, but maybe this happened. He just didn't have the tools, the scientific resources to go into a lab, take some DNA samples, check it out, and see if that was true or not. So he couldn't test his theory. By the time science technology is caught up to where we can actually test the theory, see, Darwin's original theory has proven false. Millions of years of adaptation did not cause these beaks to change, which is what evolutionary science teaches. It happened in 1 to 2 generations, which is what Scripture teaches happens, sins passed down 3 and 4 generations based on the experience that we're going through in life. So had Darwin had the benefit of science as an honest scientist, he would have modified his theory and come back and said no. But by the time he put his theory forth, it has taken root, it's spread across the world, books and articles and journal articles and thousands of publications that happened. Generation after generation has been taught this is the way it is, and now we have an entire religion, entire belief system based on this idea, which is not even rooted in science. Other epigenetic changes happening. If your mother drank alcohol while she was pregnant with you, you will have an epigenetic change, not a mutation of your DNA, an epigenetic change that for the genes that control taste, so that if you ever do taste alcohol, alcohol will taste better to you than had your mother not drank alcohol while she was pregnant with you. There's lots of epigenetics. I have a whole lecture on epigenetics. I think it's in the Gray series out there on the developing brain. I go through all the epigenetic stuff, so I'm not going to go through that now. So, for those who don't believe in God, what if we just rephrase Genesis 1:1, which says this: in the beginning God created the heavens and the earth, and we rephrase it to say this: Earth began when an extraterrestrial intelligence came and terraformed it, establishing a viable atmosphere and stable planet. I'm going to say that again so you can actually think through what I just said. Earth began when an extraterrestrial, meaning non-Earth based or originating on Earth life form, came and terraformed, making habitable terraformed it, establishing a viable atmosphere and a stable planet. Does anything I just say there contradict with Genesis 1:1? No. And a lot of scientists will go, okay, that's plausible. That's very plausible. In fact, there are actually scientific theories that don't believe in God that actually teach extraterrestrial life came here and created life on the terraformed it and seeded life on this planet. That's Genesis 1:1. That's intelligent design.
Go to any theater and you'll see a movie similar to that. The script of a movie. I mean, it's very common.
Yep. Are you comfortable with that language of Genesis 1:1? Does that make you uncomfortable? Oh, that's a little creepy. Do you know God is an extraterrestrial? God did not originate on Earth. E.T. So why is it so many prefer, if all this is so strong, and it really, the evidence, and I just scratched the surface. I tell you, get the book, man. This book is a great book philosophically. It shows it really makes it easy to see the errors in many of these humanistic theories. It's well done. But if the evidence is so strong for creation, why do so many intelligent and often good-hearted people, not people who have evil to do harm in their heart, but good-hearted people, prefer the illogical, evidence-denying ideas that there is no God, and the universe came into being by itself, ordered itself, and generated life all by itself without any intelligent input? Why do they prefer that?
It implies action.
I'm going to suggest the primary reason
Go ahead.
is that the alternative view that has been brought down through human history has been much worse than that view.
That's right.
And the alternative view brought down through history is that God functions like Satan describes him, a powerful dictator who basically says, love me or I will torture you in hell forever. And he's got this very penal, legal approach to governing his universe like a dictator runs Rome. And you see the terrible abuses in human history done in the name of this God, from the Inquisition to the burning people at the stakes, to the Crusades, to the blowing up buildings in names of your God. All these horrible human abuses happening in the name of Christianity and other religions, that thinking people go, I would rather believe in no God than in a universe run by a God like that. And I think this is the reason why we have this, because we have not, as Christians, gone out and said to these good-hearted, thinking people who have rejected this distorted, gross view of God, and the only thing having rejected, that's the only view they know, they come up with this godless worldview. We haven't gone out and shared with them a beautiful picture of God that we now know. That God is the creator, the designer, whose laws are the protocols upon which reality function, and then we deviate from those laws, it's destructive to you. And he's been working constantly for our good, our health, our welfare, only to heal and restore, and he leaves you completely free. And if you don't want restoration with him, he won't be angry at you. He'll be brokenhearted, but you'll suffer. You'll die, not because he inflicts it, but because you're breaking the very design protocols upon which life is built. And we have a much better view. And we're called to take this view forward.
There's only a few of us that have this view.
Yeah, I know, but it's spreading, guys. I don't bring it in here very often. We get emails all the time. Francesca, working for our ministry now, don't we get emails? You get some conversations from all over the world of people just the stories they're telling about how this ministry is impacting their local congregation, their local church, lives around them. So it's spreading. It's really going.
More.
Monday's lesson, and I wanted to get to this part. This is the second big theme for the lesson this week.